A posteriori necessary truths are propositions that are necessarily true, but whose truth can only be known through empirical investigation, that is, experience or observation. A common example is the claim, water is H2O. This claim is said to hold in all possible worlds. This video will attempt to show that any such claim is only true by mere definition, and that we cannot abstract parts of the definition and make such claims. And when abstracting appears desirable, we are probably dealing with several related entities. If we list all the characteristics of water, something which we cannot hope to do because we can never realize all logically possible circumstances, we will find that one of its characteristics is that when it is electrolyzed, it will separate into 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. However, to say the reverse, that anything that electrolyzes into 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen is water, would be to apply a truncated definition. It would imply that we had been able to divine all of water's characteristics in all possible worlds and compared them to all possible characteristics of all other entities, and discovered that the defining difference was that water electrolyzes into 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, when in fact, we need all of water's characteristics to properly define it. Now materialism leads us to apply such a truncated definition, but if we want to know the truth while avoiding unnecessary error, we must not continue down the path to the exclusion of others. Again, one could chemically analyze water in another context and find that it has the chemical formula H2O by 5. In other words, water in some contexts can be defined as a conglomeration of multiple H2O molecules. Then the definition H2O would be technically incorrect for this instance of water. This is not a fanciful chemical formula. It represents a useful characterization of water under certain conditions. Here I'm saying that a single molecule does not define all that we mean by the word water. Yet, if you were to electrolyze the H2O by 5, it would still yield 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. So the electrolysis result might still appear to be a defining characteristic. However, the combination of nitric acid and sodium hydroxide also produces 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen under electrolysis. This fact is somewhat circular, I admit, in this instance. Nevertheless, the electrolysis characteristic is not a unique characteristic and cannot be defining. It's true that if you take a collection of H2O molecules of sufficient numbers, you will, at least under the appropriate conditions, get the characteristics of water you are seeking. But these characteristics are not coming from the simple molecule, and so the definition of the substance producing the characteristic should include such things as the number of molecules and all other relevant facts, as well as the specific form or behavior of water we are defining. In other words, we either recognize that water has multiple phases or stages of being and treat each of them in one definition, or we provide separate definitions and names for each phase or stage, namely ice, water vapor, and liquid water. Interestingly, there are actually at least 16 forms of ice recognized. Water can also appear as an intermediate phase substance, for example, intermediate between liquid and gas. The fact that water becomes denser as it approaches 4 degrees Celsius and less dense as it cools below that temperature is important for life on Earth, and so should probably appear in a complete definition. Very few liquids behave this way, and probably none in such a pronounced way. When we look at water in this detailed manner, it appears that the a posteriori necessity must include all these characteristics, and though water is quite unique, the same should be true of everything. In short, it appears that all that we can say about a posteriori necessity is that a thing by necessity must obey its definition. We cannot abstract parts of the definition. Everything we understand empirically is understood by a process of definition, a process of understanding perhaps. The task is to clarify characteristics, so empirical knowledge will point to a posteriori necessary truth. But that truth will simply be the definition arrived at by the aforementioned process. It will be particular, peculiar to the empirical object of study. In general, we cannot reduce the set of characteristics. When a simpler definition is possible, the object of study is actually some collection of related objects. That seems strange to say, but we are possibly using an expedient to tie together various versions of the object, and we are using the expedient as a significant part of the definition. For water, it is H2O. Simply put, you cannot abstract a characteristic from a definition and have it stand for the entire definition. Therefore, the notions about a posteriori necessary truth says nothing more than that an entity, process, and so on must obey its definition. Further, if you find a reduced definition, then you are using a fiction to unify multiple aspects of the entity, process, and so on. Moreover, You cannot empirically discover fundamental truth beyond the facts of the definition from the definition alone. This applies to all such definitions. It seems that we extend our understanding by analogy for the most part, by creating fictions that have the verisimilitude of truth. Possibly all our empirical knowledge is a long string of truths and half-truths linked by fictions. And this seems to be the way it must be. Is it possible to eliminate the fictions? The answer is probably no, because then we would be left with the full definitions, which may have essentially infinite extent and cannot be understood anyway. They can only be accepted, like the child asking why. Eventually, the answer must be that it is because it is. I would appreciate comments on this topic.